Please join me in welcoming my mentor, my guide, and most of all, my friend, Dr. William Guillory.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? First thing, in the back. Well, I have a real challenge based on what Mark just said, and that is trying to live up to the words that he described me as a start. And as I listened to the Chancellor make his comments, I wondered why I was here. All the things you've already done. But what I'd like to say is how much I appreciate your kind invitation to share some thoughts with you, and I hope in the coming minutes that I talk to you that I say something that might be useful, at least one or two things to one or two of you as I move through my comments. One of the things that I'd like to state as a kind of a backdrop. By 2015, approximately 36% of the American population will be persons of color. By 2020, that number will be close to 40%. And those are people who are already born. And so that's not questionable. With that backdrop, I think we have to really consider or take seriously, as you have on this university campus, the subject of diversity and what that means, and the word inclusion. I'll try to add my spin on it tonight as I share my comments with you. But one of the first things I'd like to do, first things I'd like to do is to clarify something in the title there, and that is this term which is called achievement gap. I thought my battery was down. I think this achievement gap is more like a distribution rather than clearly defined classifications of people. And as I look at this distribution, I see a group at the top and I see a group at the bottom in general, but I see overlapping of various members of each of the groups. And the reason I wanted to make this distinction was so that I could acknowledge people from both groups who are doing exceptionally well in terms of what we might call overachievers. And when we sort of take the colors and decide to average them off, then we get something that looks like this, that defines what is called a gap. So I just wanted to clarify what we're talking about is gathering of people into classifications that tend to create what looks like a gap up there, but it's actually a distribution of people who are doing well in both of the groups that we see there. Now, what I'd like to do tonight is really focus my comments not on a lot of what is already being done, or what has traditionally been done in terms of remedial education or board academic studies for about the last 30 years, actually. And I used to participate in that process myself in science with science and mathematics students. Because I think the greatest challenge, at least from my experience in life, is adopting a type of attitude, a type of commitment to what we're trying to do. And I think I've discovered in my own experience that's the most essential element to be successful at anything we do, regardless of what grouping we might find ourselves. So it has to do with beliefs, has to do with attitudes, has to do ultimately with my own mindset. And as we used to say in the South where I grew up, essentially where I'm coming from. Now, the way I describe that is with this model. I call it the state of mind model. And what it says in simplicity is that what I believe, or my whole approach to life, drives the tools that I use in my life. And not only are they behaviors in that second box, but that processes, procedures, practices, unique ways that I do things that are all part of my toolbox. But the point I want to make is that second box is no more than a toolbox. And what ends up being a result is driven by that first box. And we tend not to pay the attention that's necessary to be able to achieve the kind of results we want to see on a regular basis. If we don't like the way something is happening, what we say is, well, why don't we change something? Now, I want to reserve the word change for that second box, because I have a different word for that first box. And quite often, what we find is that plus cela change, plus c'est la même chose in French, meaning the more things change, the more they stay the same. So what I do is tamper with that second box. That's where skills are, as a matter of fact. That's where academic learning is. That's where process is. That's where procedure is. But that box is no more powerful than the engine that drives it. I want to reserve most of my comments tonight about the engine, because the engine, in my opinion, is what's really been the key element of anything that I've wanted to achieve in my life. And in that first box is where transformation occurs. I make a real distinction between the word change and the word transformation. Change is reversible, transformation is not. I usually describe transformation as going through a door that disappears once I walk through it. And I can't go back the other way. I graduated from Dillard University, which is described as an HBCU, Historically Black College University, in New Orleans, as Mark told you earlier. And I got a scholarship to go to the University of California at Berkeley for graduate school. I quickly came to the conclusion that I was in trouble. After I went to my first class, and I said, boy, you're in trouble. And I was trying to figure out, now what am I going to do about this? To make a long story short, what saved me at first semester was the brainwashing that I received at Dillard University about commitment, dedication, and hard work, and what we could be. I actually believed that stuff. I mean, as much resistance as I tried, we had these things every week called Vespers that were a requirement. And I tried everything I could to get out of going to that, having people take my little name tag and so forth. But I later learned one of the most valuable experiences that I had, because ultimately that saved me. In other words, I was pretty much prepared in the first box, and where my deficiency existed was in the second box. But the point is, it's important to know where the difficulty is in terms of the gap in order to be able to operate effectively where we are. It's also effective or critical in terms of teaching or more or less facilitating a person in the learning experience. Am I trying to do something in the first box, or am I trying to do something in the second box? And am I trying to do both? It's critically important for the individual to know where the difficulty might be in terms of competition. So the point is not to glorify what I might have done in my life. The point I'm trying to make is that no matter how much remedial work I might have done, it wouldn't have made ultimately much difference to me at all. By the way, there were no remedial courses in those days. Drawing upon my own personal experience then of college and graduate school, what I'd like to do is share with most of the students tonight, in the first 1/3 of what I'll talk about is what are the 4 cognitive skills that I actually learned were critical to me. So a lot of it will be about my personal experience, and try to have you associated with it as you apply it to your own studies in your own life. The 4 skills that I picked up along the way is what I call begins with an empowered attitude. And I'll define what I mean by that in a minute. The creation of allies rather than adversaries. We're in a very competitive society. We compete for grades, supposedly. It doesn't have to be that way in terms of collective learning. Third, I'd like to talk about self-discipline, and the last thing I'd like to speak of is direction. Now, none of these words are new or surprising to anybody in this audience, but what I'd like to do is put my own spin on each of them as I personalize them in terms of what I've gone through in terms of my successes in life.